Colleagues, I now open the 10th meeting of the COP29, 10th meeting of the CMP 19, and 10th meeting of the CMA 6. During our first week here in Baku, observer organizations have shared their insights, expertise, and experiences from the forefront of climate action and science. Their perspectives have been clear and compelling, reinforcing the urgency for action that we all recognize. I would like to express gratitude to the observer community for their valuable contribution to strengthening the UNFCCC process and supporting parties' efforts to implement climate policies. With your continued support, we are committed to maintaining the open, transparent, and inclusive UNFCCC process and advancing the implementation of the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. Dear colleagues, as we listen to statements from IGOs and NGOs, I would like to remind representatives of the measures in place for effective time management, namely the 2-minute time limit for these statements during the high-level segment. Please ensure that statements are as concise as possible. Full text of official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. For those not present in plenary during their speaking slot, they will be scheduled to speak at the end of all statements in the same category. So, dear colleagues, let's begin with our line of speakers and statements. First, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Lucas Di Pietro Paolo, Chair of the Adaptation Fund Board. Lucas, you have the floor.
Julio?
Please.
Okay, thank you. I will be delivering my speech in Spanish. Excellencia.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's an honor for me to address you as Chair of the Board of the Adaptation Fund. This fund exclusively dedicated to adaptation and for 17 years has benefited over 45 million people across 110 countries. We have pioneered direct access modalities and are now leading locally driven adaptation with new funding channels to empower those on the front lines of the climate crisis. However, the adaptation finance gap continues to grow as the impacts of climate change worsen. Public grant-based financing is crucial to support the most vulnerable and to catalyze action and to mobilize additional resources. While we await the full operationalization of Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement and the transfer of the share of proceeds, the Adaptation Fund remains heavily reliant on voluntary contributions. We are deeply grateful for the recent pledges of support, but we're still far from achieving our resource mobilization target for 2024. Without sufficient and predictable funding, the fund will not be able to meet the growing needs, which will increase the costs of inaction, exceed adaptation limits, and exacerbate loss and damage. At this COP29, we urge governments to scale up public adaptation finance and ensure the fund meets its target. Doubling adaptation finance is not just a commitment, it is an urgent necessity. Delaying action comes at a cost far too high for vulnerable communities. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor Di Pietro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Di Pietro Paolo.
Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Clarissa Arida, Acting Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, the Southeast Asian region is one of the most vulnerable areas to climate change. This impacts the region's carbon-rich ecosystem and habitats, home to over 25% of the planet's known plant and animal species, and most of all, the 670 million people that depend on natural wealth. The CBD COP16 in Colombia brought to the fore the need for coherent and concerted actions on climate change and biodiversity, and subsequently between the two conventions. IPBES and IPCC recognize this inextricable link, especially where most biodiversity-oriented actions would most of the time translate to climate change actions. We re-echo the ASEAN joint statements at the CBD COP16 and here at COP29 in Baku, highlighting nature and biodiversity as entry points towards climate action in the region. We join the ASEAN member states in its call to mobilize financial resources to attain the goals of the Paris Agreement and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Healthy ecosystems are solutions, our natural solutions, enhancing resilience against extreme weather events and other serious climate-related challenges. By mainstreaming biodiversity into the climate action plans of development sectors such as agriculture, health, infrastructure, finance, and business sectors, we can address the interconnected issues our planet faces. The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity champions these synergies, collaborating with the ASEAN member states and partners to ensure that resources are effectively optimized for climate and biodiversity. The ASEAN Heritage Parks and the ASEAN Green Initiative demonstrate our commitment towards promoting nature as solutions in one of the most vulnerable and disaster-prone regions of the world. As one of the technical support centers in Asia to achieve the global biodiversity targets, we stand ready to play a key role in fostering coordinated and cohesive actions to address the interlinked crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Denis Rangi, Director General of CAP International. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, established under UN Treaty, CABI is an intergovernmental, not-for-profit organization owned and guided by its 48 member countries and dedicated to tackling agricultural and environmental challenges. For over 100 years, CABI has developed and applied nature-based solutions to combat plant pests and diseases and invasive species. These pose a major threat to farmers, especially smallholders, and the wider environment, and are becoming an even bigger problem because of climate change. We are working across the world at all levels, including with international bodies, national policymakers, and farmers, to support an inclusive transition to sustainable food systems. In particular, we are working to ensure sufficient, safe and nutritious food can be introduced under the new realities of climate change, while also reducing inequality through better opportunities, especially for rural women and youth. To deal more sustainably with pests, we have promoted the approach of integrated pest management, which enables more judicious use of chemical inputs. We have introduced nature-based solutions against major pests, and notable successes have been achieved to tackling invasive pests and weeds using classical biological control. We recognize that a range of skills, including digital tools, are needed to combat the changing threats. For example, the CABI-led Plantwise Plus global program aims to strengthen national extension and plant health systems and to help smallholder farmers build resilience to climate change. Key to this is the ability to predict, prepare and prevent crop pests and diseases using climate-smart digital technologies such as those used by the CABI-led Pest Risk Information Service in Sub-Saharan Africa. Ensuring that agricultural support systems, particularly in developing countries, work well is a critical step in enabling adaptation to ongoing and future changes in climate, the ability of farming systems to sustainably grow more and lose less to pests. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, sir. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Amit Proti, Director General of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Sir, you have the floor.
Excellencies, when disasters strike, lives are lost, services are disrupted, and repairs consume money that could have been used elsewhere. Globally, $845 billion worth of infrastructure is at risk from being damaged or destroyed each year, and 1.2 billion people are at risk from climate-induced disasters. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, comprising 40 countries and 7 international organizations, commends the COP presidency's effort to prioritize the need of the most vulnerable and push for agreement on the new collective quantified goal and on climate financing more broadly. In the past month, we have witnessed devastating flooding in Valencia. Cuba has been hit by back-to-back hurricanes. 2024 is virtually now certain to be the warmest on record, with extreme heat a pressing global concern. Excellencies, ensuring sufficient adaptation financing to build resilience is essential. Investing in climate and disaster resilient infrastructure produces a resilience dividend that includes avoided asset loss, reduced service disruption, increased quality and reliability of public services, and increased economic growth. This resilience dividend underpins a compelling economic argument for investing in infrastructure resilience. Most of the infrastructure we will use in 2050 is yet to be built. Decisions made in Baku can support the world to lock in resilience rather than risk, achieve the SDGs, and reach net zero. I urge all parties to ensure adaptation funding is available for climate and disaster resilient infrastructure, especially for the most vulnerable. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure stands ready to support you in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now it is my pleasure to welcome the Right Honourable Patricia Janet Baroness Scotland of Astral KC, Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, we meet at COP29 not only as leaders of nations and organisations, but as custodians of a planet on the brink. This is not just another summit. It is a moment of reckoning. The Commonwealth's climate leadership began in Langkawi decades ago, and in the last 8 years we've mobilised hundreds of millions through our Climate Finance Access Hub. We have championed sustainability through our Blue and Living Lands Charter and pioneered regenerative solutions. Now, through common space, geospatial analysis and AI, we are unlocking the power of space technology to fight the climate crisis on every front. Our work has been important and impactful, but alone it is not enough. The harshest realities of climate change are borne by the nations least responsible for it. Rising seas, relentless heat, devastating storms, mounting debt. This is their daily existence. These nations look to us, not for promises, but for action, for justice, for change. And yet we are falling short. Let this be the moment. We refuse to fail. Finance must move, not tomorrow, but now. Partnerships must transcend borders, sectors and divisions. Justice must become more than a talking point. It must be our mission. We cannot wait for the next storm, the next famine, the next COP to spur us into action. The hour is late, but hope and faith still alive. Let us seize this moment with urgency and audacity. Let us leave indifference and division aside. Together, let us lead the world toward resilience, prosperity, and peace. Not for us, but for those who come after. Our people are watching. It is our duty to show them what true leadership looks like. And I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Mohamed Hamel, Secretary General of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, it is with great respect that I extend my sincerest congratulations to the Republic of Azerbaijan, an esteemed member of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, for its exceptional efforts and exemplary arrangements in hosting COP29. Natural gas currently fulfills 23% of the world's primary energy needs. It plays a crucial role in driving economic growth, improving living standards, reducing household pollution, enhancing urban air quality, and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. Natural gas is a partner of intermittent renewables, providing backup and stability when the sun is not shining, the wind is not blowing, or hydropower faces limitations due to drought. Moreover, through cost-competitive blue hydrogen, it offers a viable pathway to decarbonize hard-to-abate industries. Finally, natural gas plays an essential role in global food security, serving as the primary feedstock for fertilizer production. As the world's population grows, the economy expands, and human living conditions improve, the world will need more natural gas, not less. The Algiers Declaration, adopted at the 7th GECF Summit of Heads of State and Government, reaffirmed the determination of member countries to strengthen collaboration aimed at expanding the role of natural gas in sustainable development and ensuring the reliability and resilience of natural gas systems. The declaration also called for timely investment and hindered financial flows, access to technology, and knowledge transfer in a non-discriminatory manner. The outcome of COP29 should facilitate financing for natural gas projects and scaling up cleaner technologies such as carbon capture, utilization, and storage. This is crucial for ensuring just, inclusive, and orderly energy transitions that leave no one behind. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure now to welcome Mrs. Jan Beagle, Director General of the International Development Law Organization. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, for over 4 decades, the International Development Law Organization has championed the rule of law as a catalyst for fostering peace and sustainable development. Our experience has taught us that climate change is not merely an environmental challenge, it is fundamentally a crisis of justice. For this reason, IDLO believes that putting justice at the heart of climate action can accelerate the achievement of the goals of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. Allow me to share 3 ways in which the rule of law can accelerate progress on climate action. First, we need fair laws and the institutional capacity to implement them. At the international level, they can promote the trust and accountability needed to mobilize climate finance and deal with issues of loss and damage equitably. At the national level, they can help countries deliver on their climate commitments, from the green energy transition to the implementation of effective mitigation and adaptation measures. Second, climate change is not gender neutral. The rule of law can enable the full and equal participation of women and girls in climate action, including through the elimination of discriminatory laws and policies. And third, the rule of law can empower communities that are at the forefront of climate change and most vulnerable to its impact to claim their environmental rights and participate in climate decision-making. This, in a nutshell, is what the rule of law has to offer. IDLO is committed to working with all of you to promote a more just, green and sustainable future through the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure now to welcome Mrs. Yosha Alouche, Director General of the International Institute of Refrigeration. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, esteemed delegates, the International Institute of Refrigeration is fully engaged in supporting the joint forces of the 3 COP presidencies to leverage the climate ambition and delivering concrete actions for the refrigeration and heat pump sectors as our contribution to the Troika roadmap mission to 1.5. As we gather to address the urgent challenge of climate change and compel to emphasize the critical role of refrigeration, heat pumps and cold chains in building a resilient, sustainable and healthy society while protecting our climate. Today, refrigeration is no more a mere convenience. It's a critical infrastructure essential to food security, healthcare and economic stability, just as heat pumps are necessary for decarbonizing the heat sector. The United Nations Secretary General recently called on the world to act on extreme heats, underscoring the billions now at high risks from heat waves, especially in vulnerable regions. As temperatures rise, the global demand for refrigeration will inevitably rise, driven further by population growth. Currently, 12% of the world's food production is lost due to inadequate cold chains, food that, if saved, could nourish over 950 million people who go hungry each day. Access to high-quality food, safe food, human comfort, and temperature-sensitive health products is a fundamental right that must be protected. Strengthening refrigeration and cold chain infrastructure is essential addressing these challenges. However, refrigeration is energy-intensive, consuming approximately 20% of the global electricity. Without decisive action, this demand is projected to double by 2050. In parallel, hundreds of millions of electrically driven heat pumps are needed to substitute fossil fuel heating. To keep the 1.5-degree scenario within reach, it's therefore necessary to underscore the urgency of accelerating deployment of energy, renewable energy, energy efficiency technology, and clean, low GWP refrigerants. As the world's only intergovernmental, scientifically based organization entirely focused on refrigeration heat pump sector, we are deeply committed to evidence-based policy making as a crucial driver for achieving environmental and climate goals. We maintain impartiality and prioritize supporting the successful implementation of NDCs related to the refrigeration and heating sector's transition in every country. This includes mobilizing funding, offering expert guidance, providing capacity building programs, and recommending tailored refrigeration and heat pump technologies that meet the specific needs of each nation. Our goal is to ensure a healthy present while building a sustainable and secure future for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of the International Solar Alliance. Sir, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mr. President, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to congratulate the Republic of Azerbaijan on assuming the presidency of COP29 and thank them for hosting COP29 in this beautiful city. I stand before you representing the ambitions of the 120 countries that are signatories to the framework agreement of the International Solar Alliance. The ambitions of simultaneously improving energy access, of ensuring energy security, and in the process also moving towards a zero carbon emissions future. While solar energy in combination with allied solutions and technologies such as energy efficiency and energy storage is becoming more capable of meeting these ambitions every passing day, we note the deep challenge of asymmetry in 3 areas: none of which is more important than the asymmetry of financing that you are discussing here. We see that renewable energy sector is drawing an awesome amount of investments, 1.8 trillion last year, but nearly 90% of it goes to the OECD countries, China, India, and Brazil. All of Africa gets less than 3%. For overcoming this, it is required that we help lower the cost of finance available to projects in as many geographies as possible, not just through low-cost credit, but by also lowering the cost of risk perception of these projects. We have found that guarantees are a good means of achieving this, and are creating the Global Solar Facility to provide payment guarantees to investors who wish to invest in decentralized solar projects in Africa. We ask all countries to contribute to this guarantee mechanism. We at the International Solar Alliance would like to continue to develop solutions to such problems and request you to help us drive this further, to amplify our impact so that we can together move to a future of zero carbon emissions. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, sir. It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Grethel Aguilar, Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, we are facing a deepening climate crisis. Commitments made so far are highly inadequate. The window of opportunity to limit warming to 1.5 degrees is rapidly closing. This has serious consequences for both humans and nature alike. According to IUCN's Red List assessments, 44% of the world's warm water coral species are now at risk of extinction, and 50% of global mangrove ecosystems face collapse by 2050. This is just one example of the devastating impacts of climate change that can have profound implications for communities and economies across the world. But we know what we need to do. Countries must accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels and protect, conserve and restore nature. COP29 is the finance COP. We need to leave Baku with a strong new collective quantified goal that is capable of enabling scale-up action on mitigation, adaptation and loss and damage. It must also provide more support for nature, indigenous peoples and local communities, and remain firmly gender responsive. Nature must be at the heart of everything we are doing here. And to achieve our goals, we need a united front. This calls for stronger synergies across all sectors and generations. Mr. President, the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. Every day, millions of people on this planet, especially the most vulnerable, are suffering and are demanding their right to a healthy environment, to housing, to maintaining their culture, and ultimately to life. We must act now. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Haitham Al-Ghais, Secretary General of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Today, almost 180 years on from the birth of petroleum in the world, actually it was here in Baku, Azerbaijan. Today, petroleum and petroleum-derived products continue to shape how we heat and cool our homes, construct our buildings, and transport ourselves from A to B. Oil and gas remain vital to producers and consumers around the world. As His Excellency Azerbaijan's President, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, emphasized at the opening of COP29, they are indeed a gift of God. They impact how we produce and package and transport food and how we undertake medical research, manufacture, distribute medical supplies. I could go on forever. However, access to the benefits of these products, benefits unfortunately often taken for granted, is far from universal. There remain around 685 million people around the world without access to electricity, and 2.1 billion who continue to rely on unsafe and inefficient cooking fuels. The great challenge at hand is ensuring energy accessibility, meeting rising energy demand, enhancing energy security while maintaining energy affordability, and of course, reducing emissions. OPEC has consistently advocated a balanced approach where nothing and no one should be dismissed. We need to embrace all energies, leverage all the available technologies, and ensure that the needs of all peoples around the world are taken into account. This means recognizing that the focus of the Paris Agreement is reducing emissions, not choosing energy sources. It also means developing, transferring and financing all forms of viable technologies. And it means developed countries fulfilling their obligations to meet funding gaps and scale up climate finance. Each party has the right to chart its own pathway to a sustainable future, ladies and gentlemen. The capacities, national circumstances, and development priorities of all countries must be considered to ensure that no one is left behind. It's clear there is no one-size-fits-all prescription that can overcome our climate and energy challenges. Inclusive dialogue and international cooperation, just like our Azerbaijani hosts have adopted, will be necessary going forward as we work towards building a sustainable future for all of us. We thank our Azerbaijani hosts for their gracious hospitality and their exceptional leadership. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Baron Diva Vesi Waka, Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, warm Pacific greetings. For our Pacific Island nations, climate change poses the single greatest existential threat to our survival. The rising sea levels in our blue Pacific Ocean endanger our lives, our culture and tradition. The 1.5-degree goal in the Paris Agreement represents a critical threshold in our fight for survival. The reality is that we need substantial and timely climate finance to protect our small island developing states. With this in mind, here at COP29, we expect the NCQG to offer accessible, simplified funding that reflects our unique circumstances. In parallel, Pacific Resilience Facility, a Pacific-led solution to address the issue of access to climate finance, is set to be operational in 2026. And I acknowledge and thank our partners who have generously committed to supporting this facility. Your contributions are not just financial, but are a lifeline for our future. And I invite additional contributions to strengthen our collective efforts. Mr. President, financial support alone cannot save our planet without tackling the root causes of climate change. For us in the Pacific, transitional from fossil fuel must be just and equitable to prevent unfair burden on our communities. And yes, the Pacific is at the forefront of the climate crisis. For this reason, our leaders welcome the opportunity to co-host a Pacific COP31 in Australia. And this partnership will allow us to welcome you all to our shores. Excellencies, I say to you, We save the Pacific, we save the world. Let us not live here with the future of our blue planet hanging in the balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Enam Mayara, President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. Sir, you have the floor.
Merci, Honorable Président.
Thank you, Chair, colleagues. On behalf of the members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, I would like to express our deep concern at the climate emergency and at the lack of access for all parties to resources, as has been seen recently, tragically, in the Mediterranean Sea, which is a hotspot for climate change, which this summer reached the highest surface temperature ever recorded. Each year we beat the previous record. Our organization welcomes progress in bolstering our efforts for climate financing, but we call on all parties to implement serious and concrete actions for more ambitious NDCs. Parliaments can play a crucial role by encouraging legislative initiatives to implement environmental policies, including COP commitments. I am pleased that our organization has drawn up the first ever parliamentary guide for the protection of the sea and the Mediterranean coast in cooperation with UNDP, with UNEP rather. Allow me to invite you to participate in a well-established parliamentary platform in Marrakesh for renewable and sustainable energy. The PAM will continue to work with its members to ensure that commitments undertaken today turn into concrete policies. We have no planet B. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, sir. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Zephaniah Nawadra, Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, salam and warm Pacific Island greetings. I stand here to remind us of the urgency of our pledged mission for 1.5 to stay alive and to continue to thrive on our blue planet. What we do here determines the world we leave our future generations. For small island developing states, these negotiations are existential, and we cannot afford to leave any stone or barrier unturned. The success of this COP depends on our determining the new collective quantified goals. These goals are not merely a climate investment target. They are about enabling us, the most vulnerable, to have easy access to the long-term resources and financing necessary to address the impacts of climate change that we are experiencing now and will increasingly experience into the future. I express my deep concern over the dilution of the special circumstances of SIDS through the introduction of new language and additional references which are inconsistent with the foundations laid in Rio and the principles of the Paris Agreement. A COP29 package must ensure that the 1.5 target remains within reach, accompanied by a mitigation outcome that facilitates just transition to the fossil fuel-free future we all need. Adaptation continues to be an essential element for island states. We must meet the global goal on adaptation, while recognizing that loss and damage is an issue for today, not tomorrow. We are the blue planet. Ocean is an essential part of our climate and must be formally addressed as such. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to welcome Mr. Norbu Wangchuk, Director General of South Asia Cooperative Environment Program. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as the Director General of the South Asia Cooperative Environment Programme, SACEP, I'm honored to represent South Asia region at COP29 at a critical time for our planet. South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change. Some even believe that South Asia will be the #1 casualty of climate change. The risks of climate change are no longer about the future of our children. It is a daily fight for our lives and livelihood. Underscoring the critical need for urgent action in the region, the ADB recently highlighted that the global fight against climate change could be won or lost in South Asia and the Pacific region. Mr. President, we are running out of time. The tipping threshold is dangerously close. In South Asia, the unprecedented glacial melts in the Hindu Kush mountains must be addressed with urgency. The risk of low-lying regions being submerged is imminent without immediate and decisive climate actions. As a vulnerable region, we welcome the progress made on the Loss and Damage Fund. This fund is not just a financial mechanism. It is a lifeline to provide critical and urgent support to the most vulnerable communities, helping them recover and rebuild in the face of climate disasters. SACEP stands ready to lead and facilitate regional collaboration for a climate-resilient South Asia. But our efforts must be matched with global solidarity and commitment. The challenges we face are immense, but so is our resolve. Today, we must act boldly, decisively, and with unwavering determination to safeguard the future of our region and our planet. Let us rise to this challenge because the cost of inaction is far too great. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Dr. Salim Mohamed Al-Malik, Director General of the Islamic Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I will deliver my speech in Arabic. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
In the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful, peace and blessings be upon you. I would like to extend my appreciation and thanks to the Republic of Azerbaijan for the gracious hospitality they have extended to the world to meet and reach a consensus. Now that we are here at this high-level meeting, the whole world is watching in a very precious moment. For we are all busy in a world that is ravaged by war, overshadowed by threats, and threatened by famine. It is our duty towards those who are watching to be up to their expectations and aspirations. It is a huge responsibility. Let us not repeat ourselves. You are all well aware that international conferences are becoming increasingly similar in terms of their visions and words, making them too indistinguishable from one another. Nevertheless, I wish Baku's COP the best of luck in this regard, given their seriousness and preparations. I will be concise and present 2 points. The first one is as follows. It is important for us to try to achieve a convergence because we do influence one another. The simplest violation to the environment in the north automatically affects everyone in the south. As the Prophet said, the parable of the believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for each other is that of a body. When any limb aches, the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever. Humanity's will and interest are all intertwined, which leads me to my second point. It is essential for us to use equality-based approaches if we truly want to survive as a world. Let us maintain equity in financial distribution as per our duty to conserve the environment and the climate. It is also important to exchange success stories to ensure practicality and innovation. Let us be all generous in this regard, and let us all remember that we are all in the same boat, and that any selfish act of narrow interest will be a threat to the whole boat. I present these two ideas to you, and I wish you the best of luck in this COP in a very harsh environment. And once again, I'd like to thank Azerbaijan, and peace and blessings be upon you all.
Thank you very much, sir. It is now my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Alenka Smerkolji, Secretary General of the Permanent Secretariat of the Alpine Convention. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I extend my gratitude to the Republic of Azerbaijan as COP presidency and to the UNFCCC Secretariat for their commitment and efforts in organizing this climate conference. We are all here because we know that working across borders is essential if we are to face a global emergency. However, not only need to overcome national borders, but also sectoral ones. With climate action, it is not about deciding between mitigation and adaptation. It is about accelerating both. Furthermore, we can't deal with climate change as if it were an isolated crisis. It is interconnected with biodiversity loss, land degradation, and people's well-being. The need to reinforce synergies between the three Rio Conventions was indeed one of the main messages of the recent COP16 of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And here, mountain environments can play a role as pilot areas. Within the Alpine Convention, we have 33 years of experience in cross-border cooperation and cross-sectoral cooperation at regional level. We try to work to protect and sustainably develop the European Alps. This treaty was signed because mountains deserve special attention. Mountains are hotspots of biodiversity, providers of clean water for billions of people worldwide. Yet, they are among the first victims of climate change. The expert dialogue on mountains and climate change convened by the SAPSTA chair last June was an important landmark at the UNFCCC processes. I hope that such opportunities for exchange will be provided again and again in the future and might be extended to the CBD and other processes. Next year, mountains will particularly be in the spotlight since the United Nations General Assembly declared 2025 the International Year of Glaciers Preservation. Glaciers are emblematic sentinels of climate change. Let us do what we can to halt their melting. We know the science. We also know that our actions are currently far away from what it is necessary. And I call for all present to grasp the emergency of our situation and to be bold and ambitious in their actions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. So now, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to invite the representatives from civil society organizations to address the conference. It is my pleasure then to welcome Mr. Andrew Wilson on behalf of business and industry NGOs. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, my simple message today on behalf of the global business community is this. COP29 must deliver an ambitious and comprehensive new collective quantified goal on climate finance. A goal that is true to the intent of the historic UAE consensus, a goal capable of bridging the growing climate finance gap in the developing world, and a goal that gives all countries the confidence and impetus to submit significantly enhanced national climate action plans in 2025. That new goal must without doubt incorporate a strong public finance element, including the provision of additional grant finance and concessional finance from all countries with the resources to do so. But from a business perspective, we also see a clear need and an opportunity for the NCQG to play a catalytic role in unlocking the trillions in private finance that will be needed to secure a low-carbon and resilient future by establishing an unequivocal political commitment to address prevailing barriers to the deployment of climate finance from private sources, not least the unintended impacts of macro-prudential regulation on climate finance flows to developing economies. In short, we need a deal that is truly capable of mobilizing the large-scale investments needed to put the fine words of the UAE consensus into action. Delaying, deferring, or delivering the bare minimum in Baku is quite simply not an option. As new research published by the International Chamber of Commerce shows, climate-related extreme weather events cost the global economy $2 trillion over the past decade. To put it another way, climate change is a today problem, and the costs of inaction are already being felt acutely across the real economy in the here and now. Excellencies, delivering a comprehensive NCQG will be an extraordinary achievement for multilateral negotiation, and it is in your grasp. Please seize this opportunity to make the promise of ambitious climate action a real reality, and in doing so, give us all help for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jacobo Ocharan of Climate Action Network on behalf of environmental NGOs. Sir, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacobo Ocharan and I'm speaking on behalf of the Climate Action Network. I voluntarily disclose that I have no direct ties to the fossil fuel industry and no conflicts of interest. It is fitting that COP29 is being held in a modern stadium with plenty of VIP rooms. It's a perfect metaphor for the bubble that this space has become in the recent years, completely disconnected from the real world and the real people. You might think that the severe limitations being placed in these halls on civil society will silence us, so you can go uncontested as you serve the rich and the powerful. You cannot avoid us. You cannot avoid us. You cannot escape accountability. We came here knowing that COP29 was not going to be an easy one. But the kind of bad faith tactics we have seen from developed countries goes beyond shameful. It is disgraceful. Please, don't be mistaken. We see very clearly the age of old colonial strategy of divide and rule that you are trying to deploy. In the face of these disgraceful attempts, we urge developing countries of the Global South to stand united with courage and stand up for the rights of civil society. If the Global North has any intentions of confronting the legacy of historic injustices, it can start by paying up. The Global North must provide trillions of dollars in public grants-based finance to developing countries to pay up the debt of years of climate injustice. The repayment is essential to cover the escalating cost of climate impacts, loss and damage, adaptation and just transition. We will not accept private investment or non-concessional loans as substitutes for this commitment, as they only increase the burden on poorer nations. There cannot be climate justice without gender justice and human rights. Ceasefire now. Defund genocide.
Thank you, sir. Now it is my pleasure to thank you. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Rachita Gupta of Demand Climate Justice Now on behalf of environmental NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Rachita Gupta and I'm speaking on behalf of ENGO DCJ. I voluntarily declare that I have no ties with fossil fuel industries or other emission-intensive industries and no conflict of interest. We know there are nearly 1,800 fossil fuel lobbyists at COP29. Every year, half my country suffers from devastating heat waves, while the other half is ravaged by floods. And the very criminals who have polluted our world, my home, are now here to pollute these stocks supported by global north countries. And they have been doing it for nearly 30 years. We and our communities are being destroyed by wildfires, floods, typhoon, drought, climate crisis-induced destruction and devastation. And we are not the ones responsible for it. It is you rich countries and your fossil fuel buddies. Your hunger and greed have looted our lands, our water, our forests, and with it, our very future. We are here for a finance COP, and it is increasingly turning into a bankrupt COP as you developed countries continue to deny your historical responsibility. We demand an ambitious NCQG of $5 trillion USD per year as new public, grants-based and non-debt creating climate finance for mitigation, adaptation and loss and damage. You can't lie to us that you don't have the money. You provide $1 trillion USD in subsidies to fossil fuel companies and $1 trillion USDs to your militaries. You would rather fund war, conflict and genocide than climate action. You want us to instead sell our lands and resources as carbon markets to continue your imperialism and colonialism. Now I call on our governments to stand up, stand strong against the dirty tactics of the rich countries. You are here representing millions of people back home. A bad deal, the one that shifts the burden to global south countries or dilutes the global north's obligations, is worse than no deal at all. Don't let global north governments derail this process and sow division. Our power lies in our solidarity. We simply cannot afford another shameful and empty outcome. We are asking for our right to exist. Defund genocide, fund climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Betty Chinyamunyamu on behalf of farmers and agriculture NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my name is Betty Chinyamunyamu, CEO of the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi, speaking here today on behalf of the UNCCC Farmers Constituency. In Malawi and across the globe, farmers are enduring the relentless impacts of climate change. Extreme weather patterns, prolonged droughts, erratic rainfall, and frequent floods are destroying not just our crops and livestock, but our entire livelihoods and future. We therefore urgently call for climate action that prioritizes the needs and solutions of farmers and is supported by adequate means of implementation. Access to land and water, availability of knowledge and information, adoption of locally appropriate technologies are not luxuries, they are necessities. Food security must remain at the heart of climate policies, and farmers' rights must be at the core of proposed solutions, including the development of carbon markets. We also seek greater inclusion of farmers in UNFCCC processes and a strong role for us in the implementation of COP decisions. While farmers around the globe have borne the brunt of a quart of climate-related losses and damages between 2008 and 2018, our constituency has not been included in the loss and damage fund governance. This needs to change. Let us work together to cultivate a future where farmers thrive, agriculture and food systems endure, and no one is left behind. The soil beneath our feet may be humble, but it holds the promise of life, resilience, and hope, not just for farmers, but for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure now to welcome Mrs. Daria Egereva on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples Organizations. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, we stand here as voices from the 7 socio-cultural regions of the world, guardians of all ecosystems for millennia. Climate change is not a distant threat, it is a present reality that endangers our homes, cultures and survival. All parties must reaffirm their commitment to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, our right to self-determination, including free, prior and informed consent. These are not just principles, these are essential to ensuring our survival and dignity. The NCQG must be guided by our perspectives and voices in its design and implementation, with a focus on ensuring direct and equitable access to funding for all indigenous peoples. Finance must empower rather than burden us. Conditional loans that undermine autonomy are unacceptable. Adaptation actions must position us as a crucial partners. Our knowledge systems, deeply rooted in harmony with nature, are vital drivers of our effective adaptation strategies. Excluding them risks not only our survival, but also the success of global efforts to tackle the climate crisis. Let us be clear, our survival is deeply intertwined with the health of the planet. The ecosystems we protect and the wisdom we bring are integral to the global response to climate change. By fully including us in all decision-making processes, you help secure humanity's most valuable resources for resilience. Finally, we call on all parties to recommit to the 1.5 target, phasing out fossil fuels and transitioning to sustainable systems that embody the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. Our leadership, underpinned by our knowledge systems, offer hope and solutions in this collective fight for survival. Honourable delegates, let COP29 be remembered as a turning point where our voices were not only heard but acted upon. Together we can chart a path to a just, equitable and resilient future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is now a pleasure to welcome Mrs. Marjorie Kaufman on behalf of local government and municipal authorities. Madam, you have the floor.
I will speak Portuguese. Boa tarde, Presidente.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and especially it is an honor to speak to you today on behalf of the state of the Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, ICLE and LGMA. In May 2024, the state of Rio Grande do Sul suffered the worst climate disaster in its history, a flood that affected 95% of its municipalities. We know that many cities and regions around the world are facing these climate emergency realities almost every year. It is crucial that disaster prevention and response efforts are coordinated between the national and subnational levels with more flexible resource flows for extreme events. Our climate action plan, with the support of ICLE, is being developed with and for the 497 municipalities that make up the state of Rio Grande do Sul. The CHAMP initiative has formulated an interesting model, but for implementation we need financial and technical support. We welcome the inclusion of the recognition of climate federalism and the CHAMP initiative as a tool to implement the new Brazilian NDC. For COP29 in Baku, hundreds of cities and regions under the LGMA Constituency Assembly have proposed 3 demands. Number 1, accelerate multi-level action. Number 2, finance urbanization. And number 3, integrate climate action with sustainability. We need climate finance that focuses on grants, not loans, so that all levels of government can have a just transition. And we need to build synergies between mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity to create a healthier planet. We must also ensure that Baku leaves a concrete legacy. The LGMA calls for the negotiated outcomes of COP29 to initiate a process in Baku to seize opportunities for sustainable and resilient urbanization, for climate action to be presented and agreed upon at COP30 in Belém. Only through a multi-level effort will we be able to mitigate the impacts of climate change and ensure a safer and more sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Gaston Meskens on behalf of research and independent NGOs. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak at this high-level segment. My name is Gaston Meskens from Ghent University in Belgium, and I'm speaking on behalf of the research and independent NGOs. Next year, we will be 10 years beyond the coming into being of the Paris Agreement. While progress is made, there remain multiple open issues. And yet we understand that effective climate policies are essential to maintaining the vitality and resilience of our planet. We, as the global research community, continue to emphasize the need to take into account the multiple technical and social factors that drive or inhibit the transition. Collective knowledge for action is not the sum of independent bits and pieces. It comes into being through inclusive, reflective dialogue, supported by indigenous and local knowledge, as well as by input from the natural, physical, and social sciences, and by technologists working in concert with the humanities. In that sense, the global community of researchers should be viewed as a vital resource in supporting the deliberation of actionable recommendations, and it can serve as a resource for the implementation of policy decisions. We need to find better ways to engage current researchers and practitioners in sharing their knowledge, helping others to improve their capacities, and in helping people to understand new knowledge and technologies. Bridging the divide between ambitious goals and current capabilities is essential, especially in terms of capacity building, knowledge sharing, and technology transfer. Last but not least, we cannot look away from the multiple conflicts that concern the global community today. They not only threaten the vulnerable and destroy vital infrastructure, but they also pose challenges to reaching negotiated agreements and to achieving Paris Agreement targets. Also, in the interest of effectively addressing the complex problem of climate change, we urge parties to seek peace and unity today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Joy Hernandez on behalf of trade union NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm from the International Trade Union Confederation Asia Pacific, and I speak on behalf of trade unions worldwide. We defend the rights and livelihoods of our nearly 200 million members. I declare that I have no conflict of interest with the fossil fuel industry. Workers are on the front line of the climate crisis. From the factory floors to open fields, from cities to remote communities, workers face rising temperatures, air pollution, floods, droughts, and wildfires that threaten their lives and livelihoods. According to the International Labour Organization, 70% of workers worldwide, amounting to 2.4 billion people, are at risk from climate-related health hazards. This burden falls disproportionately on workers in the Global South, in conflict zones, and in vulnerable sectors like care work and the informal labor, where women are overrepresented. Yet, the voice of workers and their organizations are sidelined from crucial discussions that are affecting their livelihoods and futures. We call on all governments to honor the commitments made in last year's Just Transition Work Program and to take decisive action. This means mobilizing radical and ambitious climate finance through a new collective quantified goal that ensures just transition in trillions, not billions. Public grant-based finance from global north countries is urgently needed to support developing countries in building resilient zero-carbon economies. Above all, we need deep systemic change that protects both human rights and workers' rights, with policies ensuring a future with living wages, safe and healthy working conditions, access to skills development, social protection, and long-term security. This is not just about sustaining jobs, but about creating new opportunities within an economy that respects our environment and upholds people's dignity. Finally, climate action is also about ending violence, wars, conflicts, and repression everywhere. There will be no climate justice without peace and social justice. Ceasefire now.
Thank you very much, Madam. It is now my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Mwanahamisi Singano on behalf of the Women and Gender Constituency. Madam, you have the floor.
Climate crisis, biodiversity loss, patriarchy continue to contribute to gender injustices, depriving women, children of their rights, their livelihood, and in some cases, their lives. These crises have perpetuated inequality and pushed millions in abject poverty. The Lima Work Programme on Gender, established in COP29, marked a critical step in advancing gender justice within the global climate framework. It aimed to challenge the persistent gender imbalances in the global climate decision-making and ensure gender consideration are woven into every facet of climate policy and in action. At COP29, Women and Gender expect parties to agree on an ambitious work program with a concrete action beyond the rhetorics. This decision must ensure that the voices, experience, and the leadership of women in all their diversities, particularly indigenous women, rural and frontline community women, are at the heart of climate governance. The work program we expect should deliver gender justice transition based on the care of people and planet towards gender-just climate future, respecting intersectionality and diversity as the key to gender inequality is inevitable. President, for far too long, feminists have demanded gender-just responsive climate finance to deliver effective and gender-just action. The NCQG decision should ensure critical access to finance, to locally led and right-based climate action, often delivered and led by women and girls. Climate finance that isn't gender responsive or human right-based is simply ineffective. COP29 must deliver new, additional, predictable, grant-based, and ambitious climate finance at scale and quality that is needed to address the urgency and the need of the people and the communities in developing countries. COP29 needs to ensure Paris Agreement goals can be achieved and work program on gender is implemented. Defund genocide, climate justice now. There will be no climate justice without human rights and gender justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Adela Esther Tuitui and Mr. Simpilo Siabuanta on behalf of the children and youth NGOs. You have the floor.
Distinguished delegates, my name is Adela Tui, a Maya Keiichiro indigenous woman from Guatemala, and
my name is Simpilo Siabuanta from Zambia. We speak on behalf of the children and youth constituency, Yango. We voluntarily declare that we have no direct tie to the fossil fuel industry or other emission-intensive industries, and thereby no conflict of interest. We want to inform you that part of this speech will be in Spanish. Kindly put on your interpretation devices. As representatives of Yango, we bring to this plenary the voices of young people across the globe. We speak not just as stakeholders, but as stewards of the planet we all share, a planet whose survival requires bold action now. As we advance this second week of COP29, we call for a shift in the current pace we are tackling the climate emergency. We cannot accept more failures and broken promises in climate finance. The global north has failed to fulfill its commitment under the Paris Agreement and keeps avoiding its historical responsibilities. Since you have decided to exclude us from the conversation, we will keep it simple. The new collective quantified goal must be grants, not loans, based on human rights and protecting the rights of indigenous people and vulnerable communities, including Afro-descendants, addressing loss and damage, and it must save all people and communities. Stop failing us and stop failing the Paris Agreement. The finance is there. Use it. Also, on the fund for responding to loss and damage and the adaptation fund, we expect more pledges. This is simply not enough.
As to adaptation, we appeal for a strengthening of the financial flows to support resilience projects driven by communities. And the current financing for adaptation remains insufficient. We urge for the implementation of the framework for the global goal with strong support by the youth, indigenous peoples and civil society. Within the mechanisms that we use, we must give priority to indigenous knowledge under the principle of free, prior and informed consent. In addition, we ask for the support of developed countries for the development of and implementation of national adaptation plans. Mitigation is important, but it shouldn't happen unfairly. Young people ask for just transition focused on renewable energies, sustainable jobs, and respect for human rights. It is time to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies and use the resources freed up to support innovation and guarantee a fair, just future for all generations. The climate crisis is not gender neutral.
Women and marginalized genders, particularly in the global south, are disproportionately impacted, yet they remain underrepresented in decision-making processes. We urge parties to enhance gender-responsive mitigation and adaptation strategies, embedding gender equity into nationally determined contributions as well as financial mechanisms.
Finally, climate security must take its rightful place as a cornerstone of negotiation. The climate crisis is fueling conflict, displacing millions, and threatening global peace. We call to acknowledge the nexus between climate and security and establish a task force to address this systemic threat, include youth in peace-building processes, for we are not only advocates but also builders of lasting solutions. This is not just a plea, it is a demand for accountability, inclusivity, and ambition. We are already driving the change. Don't stay behind.
Nosotros ya estamos.
We are already leading change. Do not be left behind. There can be no climate justice without gender justice.
Human rights. Ceasefire now. Defund genocide. Matioshi Wanohe.
Thank you very much. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Mrs. V. Bui on behalf of Education, Communication and Outreach stakeholders. Madam, you have the floor.
Dear Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, my name is V. Bui from Vietnam, and I have the privilege of delivering the statement on behalf of ECOS, the Education, Communication and Outreach Stakeholders Informal Group of the UNFCCC. We believe that action for climate empowerment, ACE, is an essential means of implementation for both the Convention and the Paris Agreement. As the sixth element of ACE, education, training, public participation, awareness raising, access to information, and international cooperation on these matters are tools which we need to use across all aspects of climate action, especially mitigation and adaptation. Regarding COP29, we appreciated the efforts by all parties to reach an agreement at this session, which will enhance our progress in ACE. The expanded call for submission to the annual summary report for ACE now includes challenges related to financial and technical support for ACE implementation. This is an important step toward the midterm review for ACE that will happen in 2026, because we still have a chronic gap in the availability and accessibility of financial resources for ACE, as well as the gap in institutional support, both of which we must resolve in order to unlock the full potential for ACE and climate action. As a community of experts and practitioners for ACE implementation, ECOS is always ready to assist parties and other stakeholders in working on these matters, and we warmly invite all colleagues to join us in these efforts as we continue toward our shared goals of ACE implementation. We thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. It is now my pleasure to welcome Mr. James Wilmes on behalf of the faith-based organizations. Sir, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, distinguished participants, dear brothers and sisters, we stand at a crossroads, facing an existential threat to life on Earth as we know it. The urgency to act cannot be overstated. As people of faith from diverse traditions, we believe the climate emergency must be addressed on a moral level. We need to take action now to confront and remedy the interconnected crises of climate breakdown, biodiversity loss and land degradation. We urge the world to act for ambitious climate action. We need to urgently phase out fossil fuels and adopt a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. On climate finance, the new collective quantified goal must respond to real needs, priorities and human rights, emphasise grant-based support for developing nations and ensure direct access for local communities and indigenous people. Loss and damage is integral to climate justice. Both economic and non-economic loss and damage must be addressed by delivering grant-based finance for climate-vulnerable communities while safeguarding the interests of indigenous peoples, migrants, women, children, disabled and other groups in precarious situations. Faith imperatives call for climate action rooted in solidarity, compassion and justice for all, prioritising sufficiency, efficiency and equity. Intergenerational justice, indigenous people's rights and gender justice must permeate all aspects of climate solutions. As people of faith, we believe that in fostering a spirit of hope, trust and decisive action, we can lift the human family's spirit and create ripples of positive change. Together, we can give the world a reason to feel hopeful about our shared future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It is now my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Nadia Haddad on behalf of the Disability Caucus. Madam, you have the floor.
Bring me the mic. Excellencies, states, observers, colleagues. My name is Nadia Haddad. I am speaking on behalf of the Disability Caucus. This is a pivotal moment in the global response to the climate crisis. If it's to succeed, everyone must be meaningfully involved. Persons with disability, especially those with intersection of disability, gender, age, indigenous identity and socio-economic status, face increased risk. Despite this, we are rarely engaged in making and implementing the policies that are meant to protect us, our families and our communities. Our leadership and lived experience are essential in crafting solutions that benefit everyone. As we push for a disability-inclusive, human rights-based approach to climate action that is truly effective and sustainable, we request 3 commitments. First, we must have a formally established disability constituency within the UNFCCC. This will ensure that persons with disability will represent 1.3 billion people worldwide. That means 1 in 6 can participate in climate negotiation on equal basis with others. Second, climate finance must provide inclusive support for countries disproportionately impacted yet least responsible for the climate crisis. So disability inclusion must be embedded in all funding for mitigation, adaptation and resilience. Only in this way we can build truly accessible infrastructure and sustainable livelihoods, making sure no one is left behind. Third, together, all of us, we must ensure full accessibility for persons with disabilities in all climate-related decision-making processes, from global to local levels. This includes physical, information and communication access. Taking together these steps are key to create a truly inclusive, resilient and just future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Dear colleagues, I thank all IGOs and NGOs for your statements. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of the statement by IGOs and NGOs and the end of the second part of the high-level segment. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP and the CMA adjourned.